This video is going to go through the more advanced setup features that we have when using a third-party device on the EtherCAT network. If you're just using digital or analog inputs and outputs, you typically won't have to change from the default PDO inputs and outputs. But if you're using a more complicated device, such as a vector drive or a stepper drive, you may have to go and do some free mapping to determine and pick and choose which PDO inputs and outputs you want to use. In our first video for setting up third-party EtherCAT devices, I went through adding slice I/O and mapping variables to the digital inputs and outputs. This was very straightforward, as there's not many options in these devices. You typically just have one variable to map for each input and each output point in the system. If I were to click on the Select Output PDO buttons, all the PDO indexes are mandatory. I can't make any changes to them. Same thing if I click on the Select Input PDO button. Also, if I click on the PDO Editor tab, there are no options here because there are no editable PDOs. On this Slice I/O system, I can't free map or pick and choose from all the variables of the device and choose which ones I want to read and write to. For many more advanced EtherCAT devices, you're going to have to do this. For example, if you have a vector drive, stepper drive, or safety PLC in the system, there are so many different parameters that you probably have to pick and choose. You can't read and write to all of the devices on that system at the same time. So for this example, I'm going to open up a vector drive. So I've imported an ESI file, and by default, these are the PDO inputs and outputs that you can choose. Although if you click on the Select Output PDO button, I can go through and I can uncheck one in order to add a different one. So if I go through, you get a little preview of the different parameters available. So if I go through, this looks like a good one. I want to be able to access not only the control word, but also the target velocity. So if I check this, click OK, it will update the output parameters available. Now I can map a variable not just to control word, but also to target velocity. I can do the same thing for input PDOs as well. I can uncheck the default one, click through, and see the different previews for these other PDO indexes. And once I find the one I want, I can click it, click OK, and it will automatically be updated the PDO Selection Mapping tab. Sometimes the list of preset PDOs don't have the perfect combination of all the parameters that we want to read or write at the same time. In this case, we can click on the PDO Editor tab and take advantage of free PDO mapping. In this case, there's a list of all the different free mappable PDO input and output indexes. So I'm going to click 1A00 for input parameters, and by default it just contains a status word. If you click the Add Object button, there's a pop-up with a list of all the available parameters for that device. So let's say we want to also read the digital inputs on the device. If I click OK, now the 1A00 PDO index has not only the status word, but also the digital inputs. If I want to map to variables to read these parameters, you have to go back to the PDO Selection Mapping tab, and now 1A00 doesn't just have status word, it has the digital inputs, because that's what I set up in the free mapping PDO Editor tab. Now I can map a variable to digital inputs. And I can read them at the EtherCAT cyclic update rate. Another tab that we have is the COE and init commands. This is a one-time read or write for any parameter that's done automatically when you first start up the EtherCAT network. By default for third-party devices, this is empty, but I can click the Add button and get another pop-up similar to when I'm doing the free PDO mapping, but this isn't setting up variables to read or write every EtherCAT update rate. Once again, this is only done once when you're first starting up the project. Now this isn't always done, but maybe you want to write to a certain parameter in order to make sure that the device always starts up in a certain known state. For instance, if I go to the AKD drive, we have a number of standard CDOE init commands in order to make sure that the drive starts up in position field bus mode. Also to set certain parameters so that we know that the units will be set a certain way. These you can certainly change, but this is just an example of things that you can do with the COE init commands tab. The last tab I'm going to go through is this COE object dictionary. Once again, this is imported from the ASI file. It's a list of all the parameters and the COE index and subindex and name for all those parameters. This is nice in case you don't have a PDF documentation for that device and you would like to find out what is the COE or CAN object index and subindex for a parameter. Maybe you don't want to have it as a PDO selection where you're constantly reading or writing it, but through your PLC program in our function block library under Field Bus EtherCAT, we have the generic EtherCAT write SDO and read SDO functions that will work with third-party devices. If you looked up the index and subindex, you can do an SDO read or an SDO write to access these parameters while a program is running. And you don't have to map it to the PDO selection mapping screen. This is a quick overview to show how to set up third-party devices on the EtherCAT network. Thank you for watching these videos.